How does a man react when a smiling gift turns out to be a quiet threat? 2 weeks after my son-in-law handed me a brand new saw, one whispered sentence from my neighbor made everything fall into place. What followed ensured he would remember that day for the rest of his life. Before we continue, we ask you to hit the hype button, subscribe, and like the video to help the channel grow. Tell us which city you are from in the comments. We would like to get to know our audience better. The saw came wrapped in glossy paper with a bow that looked like it cost more than the tool itself. Evan Cross stood in my driveway that Saturday afternoon, grinning like a game show host, his teeth too white under the autumn sun. My daughter Lena waited beside him, her smile thinner, more careful. "Drew, you're going to love this," Evan said, thrusting the package toward me. "Top of the line. None of that vintage garage sale nonsense you've been using." I took it, feeling the weight shift oddly in my hands. The box felt lighter than it should have, the cardboard softer at the edges. But I smiled back, nodded, said thank you the way you're supposed to when someone gives you a gift. "It's really thoughtful," I told him, and I meant it. At least I wanted to mean it. Lena touched my arm. "Dad, Evan spent a lot of time picking it out. He wanted to make sure you had something reliable." "Your workshop's a hazard waiting to happen," Evan added, his tone shifting to something that sounded like concern but felt like criticism. "All those old tools, the dust, the heat from the furnaces, one wrong move and you're looking at a serious incident. I've worked with molten glass for 30 years. I've pulled glowing cylinders from furnaces that run at 2,000 degrees. I've shaped light itself into bottles and vases and sculptures that people pay real money for. My workshop has passed every safety inspection the county ever threw at it. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded again. "I appreciate it," I said. "Really." Evan clapped me on the shoulder, the gesture too hard, too familiar. That's what family's for, right? Looking out for each other. They stayed for dinner. Lena made small talk about her marketing job, about a campaign she was running for some startup that sold organic dog food or skincare or something that blurred together in my mind. Evan interrupted her twice to correct details, to add his own commentary, to make sure everyone knew he worked in finance, that he understood numbers and strategy and risk assessment. "Your dad's craft is charming," he said at one point, gesturing toward me with his fork. "But it's not exactly scalable, you know? Handmade glass in the age of mass production. It's like insisting on using a typewriter when everyone else has moved to computers." Lena laughed, a small uncomfortable sound. "Evan, stop. Dad's work is beautiful." "I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying it's not practical." He turned to me, his expression open, friendly, like he was doing me a favor by explaining reality. "No offense, Drew, but you're what, 54? How much longer can you keep doing this? The heat, the standing, the precision work, it's a young man's game." I cut into my chicken, chewed slowly, swallowed. "I'm managing fine." "For now," Evan said. "But that's why I got you the saw. Modern tools, modern safety features. It's an investment in your future." After they left, I carried the box out to the shed behind the house. I didn't open it. I set it on the workbench next to a stack of sandpaper and a half-empty can of mineral spirits, and I stood there for a moment, staring at the bow. Something about the packaging bothered me. The tape on the seams looked reapplied, the edges uneven. The barcode sticker had a crease through it, like it had been peeled and pressed back down. But maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just tired of Evan's voice, of the way he spoke to me like I was a child who needed supervision. I turned off the light and went inside. 2 weeks passed. The saw stayed in the shed, untouched. I didn't need it. I had my own tools, ones I knew, ones I trusted. But every time Lena called, she asked if I'd tried it yet, if I liked it, if it was making my work easier. "I've been busy," I told her. "Big commission for a restaurant downtown. Custom glass panels for their entryway." "That's great, Dad. But you should still use the saw." Evan really wanted to help. I promised I would. I didn't. Then, on a Thursday evening, I took the trash out to the curb. The air was cool, the sky fading to purple. Martin Hale, my neighbor, was standing in his driveway, coiling a garden hose. He's 62, retired from doing electrical work, the kind of man who keeps his grass trimmed and his opinions to himself. He looked up when I approached, and his face did something strange. It tightened, like he was deciding whether to speak. "Drew," he said slowly, "can I ask you something?" I stopped at the edge of his driveway. "Sure." Martin glanced toward his house, then back at me. "That son-in-law of yours, Evan. He was here a couple weeks ago, parked in front of your place, talking on his phone." I waited. "I wasn't trying to listen," Martin continued, "but he was loud, and he said something that stuck with me." My pulse ticked up, just slightly. What did he say? Martin hesitated, choosing his words. He said, once he uses it, the liability shifts. If anything happens, it's on him, not me. And then he laughed. The street went quiet. A dog barked somewhere down the block. You're sure? I asked. Martin nodded. I didn't think much of it at first. Figured it was work talk, some deal he was setting up. But then I saw him give you that saw, and I started wondering. I thanked Martin, told him I'd look into it, and walked back to my house. My hands were steady, my breathing was even. But my mind was already moving, already sorting through the pieces. Inside, I went to the shed. I turned on the overhead light, pulled the saw from its box, and set it on the workbench. The label on the side was clean, professional. The blade guard looked intact, the power cord was wrapped neatly. But the serial number plate, the small metal tag riveted near the handle, had scratches around the edges. The numbers themselves were clear, but the plate looked like it had been removed and reattached, the rivet slightly bent. I pulled out my phone, typed the serial number into a search bar, and waited. The results loaded slowly. Then I saw it. Recall notice. Issued 8 months ago. Catastrophic blade failure under normal operating conditions. 16 reported injuries. 3 of them severe. I set the phone down. I stared at the saw. And I understood. The recall notice was still glowing on my phone screen when I heard the familiar rhythm of footsteps on my driveway. I glanced out the shed window and saw Lena walking toward the front door, her jacket pulled tight against the evening chill. She hadn't called ahead. She never used to need to. I slipped the phone into my pocket, closed the shed door, and met her on the porch. Hey, Dad, she said, her voice bright but her eyes distracted. I was nearby, thought I'd stop in. Come in, I said, opening the door. I'll make coffee. She followed me inside, settling at the kitchen table while I filled the pot. Her fingers drummed against the wood, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. Evan's been asking about the saw, she said after a moment. He wanted to know if you've had a chance to use it yet. I measured the grounds carefully, my back to her. Not yet. I've been focused on the restaurant commission. He's worried you don't like it. I turned, leaned against the counter. Why would he be worried about that? Lena shrugged, but the gesture was too quick, too dismissive. He put a lot of thought into it. He just wants you to be safe. Safe. The word hung in the air between us. Lena, I said slowly, has Evan ever mentioned anything about my workshop being dangerous? Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, then away. He's mentioned it, sure. He thinks some of your equipment is outdated. But he's just being protective. Protective of what? She frowned. Of you, Dad. He cares about you. I wanted to ask her when she'd started defending him instead of knowing me. I wanted to ask if she remembered the years I spent teaching her how to spot flawed glass, how to see the hairline fractures before they spread. But instead, I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. Tell me something, I said. When Evan gave me that saw, did he mention where he got it? A tool supplier, I think. Why? Did he buy it new? Lena's frown deepened. He said he did. Why are you asking? Just curious. She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim. You're acting strange. I'm acting careful, I replied. There's a difference. She left 20 minutes later, promising to visit again soon. I watched her car disappear down the street, then returned to the shed. The saw sat exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, turned it over, examined every angle under the bright LED work light. The blade was factory standard. The housing was clean. But that serial plate, those bent rivets, they told a different story. I thought about the recall notice. Catastrophic blade failure. 16 injuries. 3 severe. I thought about Martin's words. Once he uses it, the liability shifts. And I thought about the way Evan had presented the gift, the performance of generosity, the too wide smile. The next morning, I drove to Kellerman's Hardware, a family-owned shop on the east side of town. I've known Tom Kellerman for 15 years. He's sold me everything from drill bits to safety goggles, and he knows tools the way I know glass. The bell chimed when I walked in. Tom looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a grin. Drew Holden, he said. What brings you in? Need more diamond cutting wheels? Not today, I said, setting the saw on the counter. I need you to look at this. Tom's grin faded. He picked up the saw, turned it over, examined the serial plate. His expression shifted, became cautious. Where'd you get this? He asked. A gift. From who? Does it matter? Tom set the saw down, pulled a battered laptop from under the counter, and typed the serial number into his system. He waited, his jaw tightening. Drew, he said quietly. This model was recalled. 8 months ago. I know. He looked at me sharply. You know? I found out last night. Tom exhaled, rubbed his forehead. These things are dangerous. The blade assembly has a defect. Under normal use, the locking mechanism can fail and the blade can kick back or shatter. It's not a question of if, it's when. Can you print me a copy of the recall notice? I asked. You're not going to use this thing, are you? No, I said, but I need documentation. He printed 2 copies, handed them to me, and watched as I placed the saw back in its box. Whoever gave you this, Tom said, his voice low, they either didn't know or they didn't care. I thanked him and left. Back at home, I sat at my desk and opened a file folder. Inside, I placed the recall notice, a photograph of the serial plate, and a handwritten note detailing the date Evan gave me the saw and the conversation Martin overheard. I didn't write with anger. I didn't write with emotion. I wrote with the same precision I used when measuring glass, when calculating angles and stress points, facts, evidence, sequence. At the workshop the next day, I moved through my routine. The furnace roared, the glass glowed orange and white, and I shaped a vase for the restaurant commission. My colleagues, 2 younger glassblowers named Felix and Joanna, worked at their own stations, their movements synchronized, confident. Felix looked over at one point, wiping sweat from his forehead. You're quiet today, Drew. Just focused, I said. Everything okay? Everything's fine. But it wasn't. Not yet. That evening, Evan and Lena came over for dinner again. Evan brought wine, expensive stuff with a label in French. He poured it like he was performing for an audience, describing the vineyard, the aging process, the notes of oak and cherry. This is a real vintage, he said, handing me a glass. Not the kind of thing you pick up at a grocery store. I sipped it. It tasted like wine. So, Evan said, settling into his chair. Have you tried the saw yet? Lena glanced at me, her expression caught between curiosity and concern. Not yet, I said. Evan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Drew, I'm starting to think you don't trust my judgment. It's not about trust. Then what is it? I met his eyes, held his gaze. I'm careful about the tools I use. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Careful is good, but overthinking isn't. That saw is brand new, top quality. It's safer than anything you've got in that shed. Maybe, I said. The word hung there, and Evan's smile tightened. Lena changed the subject, asked about the restaurant commission, and the conversation shifted. But I felt Evan watching me, measuring me, calculating something I couldn't quite see. After they left, I stood in the driveway, watching their taillights fade. The air was cold, the stars sharp and distant. Martin appeared at the edge of his yard, his hands in his pockets. You okay, Drew? He asked. Yeah, I said. I'm okay. You figure out what that was about? The phone call? I nodded. I'm working on it. Martin studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Good. If you need anything, you let me know. I thanked him and went inside. In my office, I opened the folder again, added notes from tonight's dinner, from Evan's questions, from the way he'd pushed. Just a little too hard. The pattern was there now. Clear. Undeniable. And I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The cereal plate became my obsession. Not in a frantic, sleepless way, but in the measured, methodical manner I'd learned from 30 years of working with glass. When you shape something that can shatter at the wrong temperature, at the wrong pressure, you learn patience. You learn to see the flaws before they become fractures. Every bubble trapped in molten glass, every stress point in cooling crystal, every hairline crack invisible to the untrained eye. These things taught me how to look deeper, how to read what others missed. The cereal plate on that saw told a story, and I was going to read every word of it. Every mark, every deliberate attempt to obscure the truth beneath a surface that looked clean and new. I took photographs of the plate from every angle, under different lighting. The scratches around the rivets were faint but consistent, the kind of marks left by a flathead screwdriver applied with just enough force to pry metal from metal without bending it completely. Someone had removed this plate, probably to check the serial number, then reattached it. The rivets themselves showed compression marks that didn't match factory installation. I'd seen enough precision work to know the difference between machine-applied pressure and human-applied pressure. On Saturday morning, I drove to an industrial tool distributor on the outskirts of town, a warehouse-style building with rows of machinery and equipment stacked to the ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across aisles of power tools, compressors, and industrial-grade equipment. The man behind the counter was younger than me, maybe 40, with grease-stained hands and a name tag that read Paul. "Help you?" he asked, not looking up from his computer screen. I set the saw on the counter. I need to verify the purchase history of this model. Paul glanced at it, then at me. You got a receipt? No, but I have the serial number. He sighed, typed it into his system, and waited. His expression shifted as the screen loaded, his eyebrows drawing together. This unit was recalled, he said. I know. I need to know when it was purchased and by who. Paul leaned back, crossed his arms. That's not public information. I understand, but I'm the current owner, and I have concerns about how it came into my possession. He studied me for a moment, then turned back to his screen. Look, I can't give you the buyer's name without proper authorization, but I can tell you this unit was sold from our store 7 months ago, 2 weeks after the manufacturer issued the recall. So whoever bought it knew about the recall? Paul's jaw tightened. They should have. We sent notices to everyone who'd purchased that model. Email, phone calls, registered letters, the whole deal. Can you tell me anything else about the purchase? Paid cash, no loyalty card, but... He hesitated, clicked through a few more screens. We have security camera footage archived. If you've got a legal reason to request it, we can pull it up. I nodded slowly. I might need that. Can I get a printout of the purchase date and the recall notice timeline? Paul printed 2 pages, slid them across the counter. Whatever's going on here, be careful. Those saws were pulled for a reason. I thanked him and left, the papers folded in my jacket pocket. Back at home, I sat at my desk and opened the folder. Inside went the distributor's documentation, date-stamped and official. The timeline was damning. The saw had been purchased 2 weeks after the recall went public. No one buying a tool that late could claim ignorance. That evening, I called Ruth Calder. We'd worked together years ago when the workshop needed liability insurance updates, and she'd walked me through every detail with the kind of precision that reminded me of my own work. She was 45 now, sharp-eyed, direct, and completely uninterested in wasting time on pleasantries. Drew Holden, she said when she answered. It's been a while. I need your advice, I said. Professional advice. Go ahead. I explained the situation in clear, factual terms. The gift, the recall, the overheard conversation, the purchase timeline. I didn't speculate. I didn't editorialize. I just laid out the facts like pieces of glass on a workbench. Ruth was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Drew, she said finally, are you asking me if this could be considered criminal intent? I'm asking what my options are. Your options depend on what you want to achieve. If you want criminal charges, you'd need to prove intent to cause harm, which is difficult without direct evidence. But if you want to protect yourself legally and professionally, that's easier. How? Document everything. Get statements from your neighbor. Get the security footage from the distributor if they'll release it. File a formal safety incident report with your workshop's insurance carrier, noting that you received a defective recalled tool. That creates a paper trail. And then? Ruth exhaled. Then you make it public. Not dramatic, not vengeful, just factual. You present the evidence to the people who need to see it, your professional community, safety regulators, whoever's in a position to understand what almost happened. He'll deny it. Let him. Denials don't hold up against documentation. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat in the silence of my office. The plan was forming now, solid and clear, like glass cooling into shape. The next day, I returned to the distributor. This time, I brought Ruth's business card and a formal written request for the security footage. Paul looked at it, made a phone call to his manager, and 20 minutes later, I was in a back office watching grainy black and white video. The timestamp read 7 months ago, early afternoon. A figure approached the counter, set down cash, pointed at something off screen. The angle wasn't perfect, but the face was clear enough. Evan Cross. Unmistakable. His polo shirt, his confident posture, his smile. Paul's manager, a woman named Diane, leaned against the desk. We can provide you with a copy of this footage if you've got a legal reason. I do, I said. She nodded, burned it onto a disk, and handed it to me in a plain envelope. Good luck. I drove home slowly, the envelope on the passenger seat beside me. When I got home, I added it to the folder, which was growing thicker now, heavier. That night, Lena called. Dad, Evan's upset, she said without preamble. He thinks you don't appreciate the saw. I appreciate that he thought of me, I said carefully. Then why haven't you used it? Because I'm being careful. You're always careful. Maybe too careful. Her voice softened. He's really trying, Dad. He wants to be part of the family. I thought about the footage, about the cash purchase, about the recall notice Evan would have received. Lena, I said, has Evan ever talked to you about my workshop being unsafe? A pause. He's mentioned it. What exactly did he say? Just that you're getting older, and maybe it's time to think about stepping back. but he says it because he cares. Does he? Dad, don't do this. Do what? Turn this into something it's not. Evan gave you a gift, that's all. I wanted to tell her the truth. I wanted to lay out every piece of evidence, every timeline, every mark on that cereal plate. But I knew she wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Okay, I said instead. Tell him I'll try it soon. She hung up, and I sat in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. The folder was complete now. Everything I needed, documented, time-stamped, verified. But I needed one more thing. I needed the right moment, the right stage, and I knew exactly where to find it. The annual craft expo had been circled on my calendar for months. It was the kind of event where serious artisans gathered, where gallery owners and collectors walked the aisles, where reputations were built or quietly dismantled. I'd attended for the past 12 years, always with a display of my best work, always professional, always understated. This year, I had something different to bring. On Monday morning, I went to the workshop early before Felix and Joanna arrived. The space was cold, the furnaces not yet fired up, the silence broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. I walked to the safety board mounted on the far wall, a corkboard covered with inspection certificates, OSHA guidelines, and incident reports. We'd had 0 incidents in 5 years. 0. I pulled out my phone, took a photograph of the board, and added it to my folder. Felix arrived 20 minutes later, carrying coffee and a bag of pastries. He was 32, talented, meticulous in his work. He set the bag on the communal table and looked at me. "You're here early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." "The expo?" I nodded. "I'm trying to decide what to bring." Felix grinned. "Bring the Voss series you finished last month. Those were incredible." "Maybe," I said. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already registered for a demonstration slot at the expo, a 15-minute window on the main stage where craftspeople could showcase their techniques. The organizers loved it because it drew crowds. I loved it because it was public, recorded, and attended by people who understood the difference between real skill and performance. That afternoon, I called Ruth Calder again. "I'm going to present the evidence at the expo," I told her, publicly. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "That's bold. It's factual." "Factual doesn't mean safe. If you do this, you need to be prepared for pushback. Evan will deny it. Your daughter might side with him, at least initially, and if he tries to retaliate legally, you need to be bulletproof." "I am bulletproof. I have documentation." "Then you also need a witness who can corroborate the neighbor's testimony. Can Martin go on record?" I thought about Martin, standing in his driveway, his cautious voice repeating Evan's words. "I'll ask him," I said. That evening, I walked over to Martin's house. He was in his garage, organizing tools on pegboards, each one hung with the kind of precision I recognized. "Martin," I said from the doorway, "can I talk to you?" He turned, set down a wrench. "Of course. Come in." I explained what I'd learned, what I'd documented, and what I planned to do. Martin listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You want me to give a statement?" "Only if you're willing. I won't pressure you." Martin looked at his tools, at the neat rows and labeled bins, and then back at me. "I'll do it. What your son-in-law said, what I heard, that's not something I can ignore. If he's that reckless with your safety, who knows what else he's capable of." I thanked him, and he walked inside, returning a few minutes later with a handwritten statement, dated and signed. "I heard what I heard," Martin said, handing it to me. "And I'll say it again if anyone asks." Back at home, I added the statement to the folder. It was thick now, almost bursting. I placed it in a locked drawer in my desk and sat back, staring at the ceiling. Lena called the next day, her voice tight with frustration. "Evan says you've been asking around about the saw," she said. "Why?" "I wanted to make sure it was safe." "It is safe. He told you it was brand new. Did he show you a receipt?" A pause. "Why would he need to?" "Because I looked into it, Lena. That saw was recalled. It's defective." Silence. Then quietly, "You're wrong." "I have documentation." "You're turning this into something it's not. Evan made a mistake, maybe, but he didn't mean any harm." "A mistake?" "Yes, Dad. A mistake. He probably didn't know about the recall. He bought it 2 weeks after the recall was issued." Her breath caught. "How do you know that?" "I verified it." "You've been investigating him?" "I've been protecting myself." "This is insane." Her voice rose, cracking. "You're accusing my husband of trying to hurt you." "I'm stating facts." "Facts? You're obsessed. You're turning a gift into some conspiracy." "Lena, no, Dad, I can't do this. I can't watch you tear apart my family because you're too stubborn to accept help." She hung up. The connection cut out. and I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear. I wanted to call her back, to explain, to make her see, but I knew she wasn't ready. Not yet. The expo was 3 weeks away. I spent those weeks preparing, not with nerves, but with focus. I selected pieces to display, arranged them in a portable case, and confirmed my demonstration slot with the organizers. They were pleased I'd signed up, said they were looking forward to seeing my technique. "Will you be bringing anything special?" the coordinator asked over the phone. "Just my work," I said, "and a teaching moment." Felix and Joanna noticed the shift in my demeanor. I was quieter, more deliberate, moving through each day like I was measuring something they couldn't see. "You okay, Drew?" Joanna asked one afternoon, watching me inspect a finished piece. "I'm fine." "You don't seem fine." I set the glass down, met her eyes. "I'm focused. There's a difference." She didn't push, but I could see the concern in her face. At home, the house felt emptier. Lena hadn't called back. Evan hadn't reached out. The silence was deliberate, strategic. They were waiting to see what I'd do next. I wasn't waiting. I was preparing. On the Friday before the expo, I went to the shed, picked up the saw, and placed it carefully in its original box. I sealed it with clear packing tape, wrote the serial number on the outside in permanent marker, and set it beside my display case. Martin saw me loading my truck the next morning and walked over. "This is really happening?" he asked. "Yes." "You sure about this?" I looked at him, at the concern in his eyes, and nodded. "I'm sure." "Then good luck." I arrived at the expo center early Saturday morning. The hall was enormous, buzzing with conversation, the smell of fresh wood and coffee hanging in the air. I set up my booth, positioned the lights, arranged the glass pieces, and slid the sawbox beneath the display table, out of sight. My demonstration was scheduled for 2 o'clock. Until then, I worked the booth, answered questions, talked technique and tradition. People stopped, leaned closer, watched how the glass caught and held the light. At 1:30, I saw Evan. He stood across the hall at an industrial storage booth, wearing a suit too formal for the space, smiling as he spoke to the vendor. Lena was beside him, arms crossed, distant. They hadn't seen me. I checked my watch. 30 minutes. I confirmed my slot with the coordinator and returned to my booth. Felix had arrived to cover while I was on stage. "Break a leg," he said. "Thanks." At 2 o'clock, my name came over the intercom. I lifted the sawbox, carried it to the stage, and climbed the steps. The crowd was bigger than I'd expected. 200, maybe more. Craftspeople, collectors, journalists. Greg, the expo safety inspector, stood near the front with a clipboard. I set the box on the table and looked out at the audience. Then I began. The stage lights were bright, hot against my face, but I'd spent 3 decades working inches from furnaces that could melt steel. This was nothing. "Good afternoon," I said into the microphone. My voice came out steady, clear. "My name is Drew Holden. I've been a glassblower for 30 years. Today, I want to talk about something that matters in any craft. Safety, integrity, and the tools we trust." The crowd settled, conversations fading. I saw Greg, the safety inspector, lean forward slightly, his attention focused. 2 months ago, I continued, I received a gift, a saw. It came wrapped beautifully, presented with a smile, and accompanied by concern for my well-being. The person who gave it to me suggested my workshop was dangerous, that my tools were outdated, that I needed something modern to keep me safe. I reached down, lifted the box onto the table. The serial number was visible on the side, written in thick black marker. "This is that saw," I said, "and I'd like to show you something." I opened the box carefully, lifted the saw out, and set it on the table. Under the stage lights, it looked professional, clean, exactly like something you'd buy from a reputable supplier. "At first glance, this looks fine," I said, "but appearance isn't everything. In glasswork, we learn to see the flaws beneath the surface. Stress fractures, air bubbles, imperfections that can make a piece shatter under pressure." I picked up the saw, turned it so the serial plate was visible to the crowd. "This saw has a serial number. That number tells a story." I pulled the first document from my jacket pocket, unfolded it, and held it up. "This is a recall notice issued by the manufacturer 8 months ago. The model number matches this saw exactly. The recall was issued because of catastrophic blade failure. The locking mechanism is defective. Under normal use, the blade can kick back or shatter. 16 people were injured. 3 of those injuries were severe." A murmur ran through the crowd. Greg stood up, walked closer to the stage. "Now," I said, "you might think this was an honest mistake. Someone bought a tool without knowing about the recall, but here's the timeline." I pulled out the distributor's documentation. This saw was purchased 7 months ago, 2 weeks after the recall was issued. The distributor sent notices to every customer who'd bought this model, emails, phone calls, registered letters. No one purchasing this tool at that time could claim ignorance. The murmur grew louder. I saw Evan now, standing near the back, his face pale. I verified the purchase through security footage, I continued, pulling out a still image printed from the video. The buyer paid cash. The buyer knew what they were purchasing. I set the image on the table, visible to the front rows. The person who gave me this saw is here today, I said. Evan Cross, my son-in-law. Every head turned. Evan stood frozen, Lena beside him, her face stricken. Mr. Cross, I said, my voice calm, measured, would you like to explain why you gave me a recalled, defective tool 2 months ago? The hall went silent. Even the background noise from other booths seemed to fade. Evan's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Lena, then back at me. This is ridiculous. I didn't know about any recall. You purchased it 2 weeks after the recall was issued. I bought it from a discount bin. I didn't check the serial number. You removed and reattached the serial plate. The rivets show tool marks. Greg climbed onto the stage, took the saw from my hands, and examined the plate under a magnifying glass he pulled from his pocket. He nodded slowly. This plate has been tampered with, Greg said into his own microphone, and this model is on the active recall list. It shouldn't be in anyone's possession, let alone given as a gift. Evan stepped forward, his voice rising. This is insane. Drew is making up a story because he doesn't like me. I was trying to help him. Were you? I pulled out Martin's statement, held it up. My neighbor overheard you on the phone 2 months ago, right before you gave me this saw. You said, once he uses it, the liability shifts. If anything happens, it's on him, not me. And then you laughed. The crowd erupted. Voices overlapped, people standing, cameras flashing. Evan's face went from pale to red. That's a lie. He's lying. The statement is signed and dated, I said, and I have a recording of the phone call. I didn't have a recording, but Evan didn't know that. His expression cracked just for a moment, and in that crack I saw everything. The calculation, the intent, the realization that he'd been caught. You can't prove anything, Evan said, but his voice wavered. Ruth Calder appeared at the front of the crowd. I'd invited her, told her the timing, asked her to be present. She climbed onto the stage, introduced herself to the microphone. My name is Ruth Calder. I'm a legal compliance officer specializing in product liability. What we've just witnessed constitutes gross negligence at minimum and potentially criminal intent to cause harm. Mr. Cross knowingly provided a defective, recalled tool to his father-in-law after being notified of its dangers. That's not a mistake. That's recklessness. Greg nodded. I'm filing a formal safety incident report with the expo organizers and the county. This saw will be confiscated and sent to the manufacturer for additional investigation. Evan looked around wildly, searching for support, for an exit. Lena stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, her hands covering her mouth. Lena, Evan said, reaching for her. Tell them I didn't mean... She stepped back, away from him. You told me it was new. You told me you wanted to help my dad. I did want to help. By giving him something that could hurt him? Evan's face twisted. He's old. He's stubborn. He wasn't going to retire on his own. I thought if something happened, if he got scared, he'd finally step back and we could... He stopped, realizing what he'd just said. The hall exploded. Voices shouted. People surged forward. Security appeared, moving through the crowd toward Evan. I stood on the stage, watching it unfold, my hands steady, my breathing even. Greg turned to me, his expression a mix of shock and respect. Drew, I've known you for years. I've never seen you lose your temper once. But this isn't about temper, I said quietly. It's about truth. The expo organizers escorted Evan out of the hall. Lena followed, her shoulders shaking. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. The demonstration slot ended. The crowd dispersed slowly, people approaching the stage to ask questions, to offer support, to shake my hand. Felix appeared, his eyes wide. Drew, that was necessary, I said. I packed up the saw, handed it to Greg, and returned to my booth. My glass pieces still gleamed under the lights, untouched, perfect. Then, that evening, my phone rang. It was Lena. Dad, she said, her voice thick with tears. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believe you. He told me he cared about you. He told me he wanted to keep you safe. I know. What happens now? I looked out my window at the darkening sky. Now he deals with the consequences. She was quiet for a long moment. I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize for him. I defended him. I told you that you were wrong. You didn't have all the information. I should have trusted you. You will next time, I said. We talked for a while longer, her voice breaking, her apologies pouring out. I listened, patient, letting her process what she'd seen, what she'd learned. When we hung up, I sat in the silence of my living room and allowed myself finally to exhale. The folder was still on my desk. I picked it up, carried it to the filing cabinet, and locked it away. The saw was gone. The evidence was documented. The truth was public, and I was exactly where I'd always been, a craftsman who knew the difference between appearance and integrity, between performance and reality. The days after the expo moved with strange slowness, like glass cooling from molten to solid. The story spread through the craft community first, then leaked into local news, then onto social media, where it took on a life of its own. Glassblower exposes son-in-law's dangerous gift. Recalled saw central to family dispute. The headlines varied, but the facts stayed the same. My phone rang constantly. Journalists wanted interviews. Other craftspeople called to offer support. The county safety board scheduled a formal investigation. I answered the calls that mattered, ignored the ones that didn't, and continued working. At the workshop, Felix and Joanna treated me with a new kind of respect. Quieter, more careful. They'd seen the video someone recorded at the expo, watched it go viral, watched me dismantle Evan's lies with nothing but documentation and calm delivery. "You're famous now," Felix said on Monday morning, grinning as he fired up his station. "I'm the same person I was last week," I replied. "Yeah, but now everyone knows you don't mess around." Joanna looked up from her workbench. "Has Lena called again?" "A few times." "And we're talking. That's enough for now." The truth was more complicated. Lena called every day, sometimes twice, her voice raw with guilt and confusion. She'd moved out of the house she shared with Evan, staying with a friend while she figured out what came next. Divorce papers were filed within a week. Evan had tried to contact her, tried to explain, tried to minimize what had happened, but she wasn't listening anymore. "He keeps saying it was a mistake," she told me during one call, that he panicked when he realized the saw was recalled but didn't know how to tell me. "Do you believe that?" I asked. A long pause. "No? I heard what he said at the expo, about wanting you to get scared, to retire. He was calculating something, Dad. He was planning." "People make choices," I said, "and choices have consequences. I should have seen it sooner." "You saw it when you needed to." On Wednesday, Ruth Calder called with an update. "The county's investigation is moving forward," she said. "They're treating this as criminal negligence. Evan's going to face charges." "What kind of charges?" "Reckless endangerment, possibly attempted assault. It depends on how the prosecutor interprets intent. But with the evidence you provided, the timeline, the purchase records, the witness statement, they have a strong case." "And Evan?" "He's hired a lawyer. They're trying to negotiate, but the expo footage makes that difficult. You can't unsay what he said on camera." I thanked her and ended the call. The legal process would take time, months probably, but that was fine. I'd already done what I needed to do. That evening, Martin knocked on my door. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, his expression uncertain. "Wanted to check in?" he said. "See how you're holding up?" "I'm fine," I said. "Come in." We sat in the living room, the silence comfortable. Martin had been my neighbor for 8 years, but we'd never been close, never shared more than polite waves and occasional lawn care advice. Now, though, something had shifted. "You did the right thing," Martin said finally. "What you did at the expo, that took guts. It took documentation." He smiled faintly. "Most people wouldn't have thought to gather all that. They would have just thrown the saw away and moved on." "I work with glass," I said. "You learn to see the cracks." Martin nodded, understanding. "If you need anything, you let me know. Testimony, statement, whatever." "I appreciate that." After he left, I stood at the window, watching the street darken. The neighborhood was quiet, ordinary, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. But drama, I'd learned, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, deliberate, a slow accumulation of choices that led to a single decisive moment. At the workshop the next day, a reporter from a local news station showed up, asking for an interview. I declined politely but firmly. The story was already public. I didn't need to add commentary. "People want to hear from you," the reporter said, a young woman with sharp eyes and a persistent smile. "You've become something of a folk hero." "I'm not a hero. I'm a craftsman who protected himself. But you exposed someone who tried to hurt you. That's courage. That's common sense." She left disappointed, but I didn't care. The attention would fade eventually. The news cycle would move on to the next story, the next scandal, the next moment of outrage. What mattered was that the truth was documented, public, and irrefutable. On Saturday, Lena came to visit. She looked thinner, tired, her eyes red-rimmed. We sat at the kitchen table, coffee between us, the silence heavy. "I keep replaying it," she said finally. "The things Evan said, the way he looked at you. I thought I knew him, Dad." "You knew the version he showed you." "How did I miss it?" "Because he was careful. People like Evan are good at being careful." She wrapped her hands around her mug, staring into the dark liquid. "I defended him. I told you that you were paranoid. You didn't have the information. I should have trusted you. You trust me now. That's what matters." Lena looked up, her eyes wet. "I'm so sorry." "I know." We talked for an hour, her voice breaking occasionally, her questions pouring out. She wanted to understand how I'd seen it, how I'd known, how I'd stayed so calm. I explained the process, the methodical gathering of evidence, the decision to make it public rather than confront him privately. If I'd confronted him at home, I said, he would have denied it, made excuses, turned it around on me. But in public, with witnesses, with documentation, he couldn't hide. "You planned it perfectly." "I planned it carefully. There's a difference." When she left, she hugged me tightly, the way she used to when she was young, before life got complicated. "I love you, Dad," she said. "I love you too." The following week, Greg called. The county investigation had concluded. Evan was formally charged with reckless endangerment and criminal negligence. His lawyer was pushing for a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested. "They want to make an example," Greg said. "Cases like this, where someone knowingly gives a dangerous tool to a family member, it sends a message." "What kind of sentence is he looking at?" "Could be jail time, could be probation and community service. Depends on the judge. But his reputation is finished. The video from the expo has been seen by thousands of people. No one's going to forget what he did." I thanked Greg and hung up. The legal consequences were important, but they weren't the point. The point was that Evan's plan had failed. He'd wanted to scare me into retirement, to position himself as the protective son-in-law, to inherit whatever professional connections and reputation I'd built. Instead, he'd exposed himself as reckless, calculating, and dangerous. At the workshop, business continued. Orders came in steadily, the restaurant commission was completed and installed, and a gallery downtown asked about displaying my work. Life moved forward, as it always did, one careful step at a time. Felix asked me one afternoon if I was glad it was over. "It's not over," I said. "Legal process takes time, but the important part is done." "What's the important part?" "The truth is public. That's all that matters." He nodded, turned back to his work, and I did the same. The glass glowed in the furnace, orange and white and perfect. 3 weeks after the expo, the local courthouse scheduled Evan's preliminary hearing. I wasn't required to attend, but Ruth suggested I should. "Your presence matters," she said over the phone. "It shows you're taking this seriously, that you're not backing down." I never back down from facts. I know, but courtrooms are about perception as much as evidence. And right now, the perception is that you're a victim who fought back. Let's keep it that way. So on a cold Tuesday morning in late autumn, I put on my one good suit and drove downtown. The courthouse was an old building, stone and concrete, the kind of place that absorbed every argument and verdict into its walls. I walked through security, found the correct courtroom, and took a seat in the gallery. Lena was already there, sitting 3 rows ahead. She glanced back when I entered, offered a small wave, and turned forward again. She'd told me she planned to attend, that she needed to see it through. Evan arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by his lawyer, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Evan wore a dark blazer and slacks, his expression carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was clenched. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics. The prosecutor laid out the charges methodically, reading from the documentation I'd provided, the recall notice, the purchase timeline, the witness statement, the video footage from the expo. Evan's lawyer tried to argue that it was an honest mistake, that his client had purchased the saw from a discount bin without checking the serial number, that there was no intent to cause harm. The prosecutor pulled up the video footage on a screen. The courtroom watched Evan's face as he said, "He's old. He's stubborn. He wasn't going to retire on his own. I thought if something happened, if he got scared, he'd finally step back and we could..." The lawyer's argument collapsed in real time. The judge asked Evan directly if he'd known about the recall when he gave me the saw. Evan hesitated, looked at his lawyer, and then said, I may have seen something about it, but I didn't think it was serious. You didn't think catastrophic blade failure was serious? The judge asked, her tone flat. I thought it was exaggerated. Product recalls happen all the time. And yet you removed and reattached the serial plate. Another hesitation. I was checking the model number. Why? To see if it matched what I'd paid for. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the defendant purchased this saw 2 weeks after the recall was issued. He paid cash, avoided leaving a paper trail, and according to security footage, he specifically asked the distributor clerk about discount items. This wasn't carelessness, this was calculated. The judge leaned back, considered, and then spoke. Mr. Cross, I'm ordering a full trial. Bail is set at $15,000. You're prohibited from contacting Mr. Holden or any witnesses associated with this case. Do you understand? Evan nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. The hearing ended. Evan's lawyer escorted him out through a side door, avoiding the main hallway where reporters waited. I stood slowly, gathered my coat, and walked toward the exit. Lena caught up with me in the lobby. Dad, she said, her voice quiet. Thank you for coming. I wanted to see it. Did it help? It confirmed what I already knew. She nodded, her eyes distant. I keep thinking about the way he looked up there, like he genuinely didn't understand why this was a big deal. Some people don't understand consequences until they're facing them. Do you think he'll go to prison? I don't know. That's up to the judge. We walked outside together into the cold November air. The courthouse steps were busy with people coming and going, lawyers and defendants and families navigating their own crises. I filed the divorce papers last week, Lena said, but he didn't contest it. Good. I thought it would feel worse, but mostly I just feel relieved. That's normal. She looked at me, her expression soft. How did you know, Dad? How did you see what he was before I did? I thought about the serial plate, the scratches around the rivets, the way Evan had smiled when he handed me the saw. I've spent 30 years learning to see flaws, I said. In glass, in people, in situations. You look long enough, you see the cracks. Lena hugged me again, tight and quick, and then walked to her car. I watched her drive away, then returned to my truck. The trial was scheduled for January, 2 months away. Ruth called that afternoon to discuss strategy, but there wasn't much to strategize. The evidence was airtight. The video was damning. The only question was how severe the consequences would be. Evan's lawyer is going to push for a plea deal, Ruth said. Reduce charges in exchange for a guilty plea. What do you think? I think the prosecutor has enough to win at trial, but plea deals save time and resources. It depends on what you want. I want the truth on record, officially. Then we push for trial. The weeks that followed were strange. The media noise faded, replaced by something quieter. People in the craft community knew what had happened and treated me with a new respect that felt undeserved. I hadn't been heroic. I'd protected myself using what I had, documentation, evidence, and a public record. At the workshop, orders increased. Galleries that had never shown interest reached out. A university invited me to give a guest lecture on safety and craftsmanship. I accepted the lecture and declined most of the gallery offers. You could capitalize on this, Felix said one afternoon, watching me turn down another request. People want to buy from you now. They wanted the work before, I said. The work hasn't changed. But the story has. The story isn't for sale. Felix smiled. You're a strange guy, Drew. I'm consistent, I said. There's a difference. Thanksgiving came quietly. Lena and I spent it together, just the two of us. A small turkey, old movies. We didn't talk about Evan or the case. We focused on rebuilding what hadn't completely broken. On December 1st, Ruth called. Evan's lawyer offered a plea, she said, guilty to reckless endangerment, 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, community service. What does the prosecutor think? They're considering it. It avoids the uncertainty of trial. I want the trial, she paused. Drew, trials are unpredictable. A plea guarantees consequences. It also lets him soften the story. A lesser charge, a few months, then he tells people it was a misunderstanding. The record will still show what he did. Not clearly enough, I said. Tell them I want the trial. Ruth sighed. All right. The date was set for mid-January. Winter deepened. Days shortened. The workshop stayed warm, filled with furnace heat and molten glass. I worked steadily, methodically, shaping each piece with the same care I'd used to assemble the evidence. And I waited for the day the truth would be spoken aloud in a courtroom, entered into transcripts, filed into records, and made permanent. January arrived with snow and bitter wind. the city sharpened under ice and cold so deep it burned the lungs. I drove to the courthouse the morning of the trial, heater blasting, hands steady on the wheel. This courtroom was larger, assigned for a full jury trial. I took my seat in the gallery, Ruth beside me, her briefcase open. Lena sat across the aisle, alone, her coat pulled tight around her. The jury filed in. 12 people who looked tired, resigned, eager for it to be over before it began. The judge entered, the same one from the preliminary hearing, and the room settled. The prosecutor opened with facts. Chronological, clean, the saw, the recall, the purchase timeline, the altered serial plate, the overheard phone call, the expo footage, each piece presented without drama. No speculation, no theatrics, just evidence, stacked carefully, one layer at a time. Evan's lawyer tried to build a defense around ignorance and poor judgment. His client had made a mistake, yes, but not a criminal one. He'd bought a tool without checking its history, given it to his father-in-law out of genuine concern, and been blindsided by the public accusation. This is a family dispute that's been blown out of proportion, the lawyer said during his opening statement. My client made an error in judgment, but there was no intent to cause harm. The prosecutor called me to the stand first. I walked to the front of the courtroom, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked me to describe my relationship with Evan, the day he gave me the saw, and what happened afterward. I spoke clearly, factually, without emotion. I described the packaging, the scratches on the cereal plate, the conversation with Martin, the verification at the hardware store, and the distributor. I explained how I'd documented everything, step by step, and why I'd chosen to present it publicly. Why didn't you confront Mr. Cross privately? The prosecutor asked. Because private confrontations can be denied, I said. Public documentation can't. Evan's lawyer cross-examined me, trying to suggest I'd overreacted, that I'd turned a simple gift into a vendetta. Isn't it true, Mr. Holden, that you've always had a difficult relationship with your son-in-law? No, I said. We had a polite relationship. But you didn't approve of him? I didn't know him well enough to approve or disapprove. And yet you built an entire case against him over a single tool? I built a case around documented evidence. The tool was just the catalyst. The lawyer tried a few more angles, but I didn't waver. The facts were the facts. Everything else was noise. Martin was called next. He testified about the phone call he'd overheard, repeating Evan's words exactly. Evan's lawyer tried to discredit him, suggesting he'd misheard, that he'd been influenced by my accusations. I know what I heard, Martin said calmly, and I wrote it down the same day before Mr. Holden ever asked me about it. The distributor's manager, Diane, testified about the security footage, confirming the date and time of purchase, confirming Evan's identity on the video. Greg, the safety inspector, testified about the recall, about the severity of the defect, about the dangers of blade failure. In your professional opinion, the prosecutor asked, would Mr. Holden have been at risk if he'd used this saw? Absolutely, Greg said. The defect is catastrophic. It's not a question of if the blade would fail, but when. Evan's lawyer tried to argue that the saw might have been fine, that recalls were often precautionary. This recall was not precautionary, Greg said firmly. 16 people were injured. 3 required hospitalization. The manufacturer pulled every unit from the market and offered full refunds. That's not precautionary. That's liability mitigation. The trial lasted 3 days. Evan took the stand on the 3rd day, his lawyer coaching him through a careful narrative. He claimed he'd bought the saw from a discount bin, hadn't checked the serial number, hadn't known about the recall until the expo. I was trying to help my father-in-law, Evan said, his voice measured. I noticed his tools were old, and I thought a new saw would be useful. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. Mr. Cross, you testified that you bought this saw from a discount bin. Is that correct? Yes. And you paid cash? Yes. Why cash? Evan hesitated. I don't remember. Maybe I didn't have my card. The security footage shows you specifically asking the clerk about discounted recalled items. Do you remember that conversation? No. You don't remember asking about recalled items? I might have asked about discounts generally. The prosecutor played the security footage. The audio was faint but audible. Evan's voice asking the clerk, "What do you have that's been recalled but still functional?" The courtroom went silent. Mr. Cross, the prosecutor said, "Does that refresh your memory?" Evan's face tightened. I was curious. I didn't think it was a big deal. You were curious about buying a dangerous tool? I didn't know it was dangerous. You just asked specifically about recalled items. I thought I could get a deal. The prosecutor pulled up the recall notice, projected it on the screen. This notice was sent to the distributor 2 weeks before you made your purchase. It explicitly states the nature of the defect and the risk to users. Are you saying you bought a tool from a recall list without reading why it was recalled? Evan opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at his lawyer. No further questions, the prosecutor said. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. On the charge of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. Evan's face went blank. Lena exhaled sharply, her hand covering her mouth. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, and the courtroom emptied slowly. Ruth squeezed my shoulder. You did it, she said. The evidence did it. Still, you built the case. I stood, gathered my coat, and walked toward the exit. Lena caught up with me in the hallway. It's over, she said, her voice shaking. Not yet. Sentencing is still coming. But he was found guilty. That's what matters, right? Yes, I said. That's what matters. We walked out into the cold together, the snow falling in soft, steady flakes. The 2 weeks before sentencing passed in a blur of quiet routine. I returned to the workshop, where the rhythm of glasswork provided a familiar anchor, the heat, the focus, the careful shaping of something beautiful from raw material. Felix and Joanna asked occasionally how I was holding up, and I told them the same thing each time. I was fine. The truth was more complicated. I wasn't relieved, wasn't triumphant, wasn't even particularly satisfied. I felt the way I always felt when a piece of glass came out of the furnace exactly as planned. Calm, confirmed in my methods, ready to move on to the next project. Lena called often. She'd been attending therapy, processing the betrayal, rebuilding her sense of self outside of the marriage that had defined her for years. She sounded stronger each time we spoke, less fragile, more certain. The therapist says I need to forgive myself, she told me one evening, for not seeing what Evan was. You saw it when it mattered. I should have seen it sooner. Hindsight is always clearer. You can't blame yourself for trusting someone who worked hard to be trustworthy. Do you forgive me, Dad? For defending him? I was quiet for a moment, choosing my words carefully. There's nothing to forgive. You were in an impossible position. You did the best you could with the information you had. She cried then, soft and relieved, and we stayed on the phone until she'd steadied herself. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. I arrived early, the courthouse steps slick with ice, the sky gray and heavy with the promise of more snow. Ruth met me in the lobby, her expression professional but warm. Ready? She asked. I've been ready since the beginning. The courtroom filled quickly. Lena took her usual seat across the aisle. Martin sat a few rows back, offering me a brief nod when our eyes met. Evan entered with his lawyer, his face thinner than I remembered, his eyes hollow. The judge reviewed the case, the verdict, and the sentencing guidelines. She asked if either side wished to make a statement before she announced the sentence. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, this case represents a clear and conscious disregard for another person's safety. The defendant knowingly purchased a defective, recalled tool and gave it to his father-in-law with full awareness of the potential consequences. This wasn't negligence. It was calculation. The state recommends the maximum sentence within the guidelines. Evan's lawyer stood next. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. He's cooperated fully with the investigation and has expressed genuine remorse for his actions. While his judgment was flawed, we ask the court to consider that no actual harm occurred. We respectfully request leniency, probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. The judge looked at Evan. Mr. Cross, do you have anything to say? Evan stood slowly. He looked at me for the first time since the trial began, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet. I made a terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I let my frustrations cloud my judgment. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. The judge's expression didn't change. Mr. Cross, I've reviewed the evidence extensively. The security footage, the timeline, the witness testimony, all of it points to deliberate intent, not poor judgment. You didn't accidentally buy a recalled tool. You specifically sought one out. You removed and reattached the serial plate to obscure its history. And according to your own words at the Craft Expo, you hoped that using the tool would frighten your father-in-law into retirement, creating an opportunity for you to benefit from his professional reputation. Evan's face went pale. That's not a mistake, the judge continued. That's premeditation. And while no physical harm occurred, that's due entirely to Mr. Holden's diligence, not to any restraint on your part. She paused, glanced at her notes, and then spoke. I'm sentencing you to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You'll also complete 500 hours of community service focused on workplace safety education. Additionally, you're prohibited from any contact with Mr. Holden or any member of his family for the duration of your probation. Evan's lawyer started to object, but the judge raised her hand. This sentence is final. The court is adjourned. The gavel struck. Sharp. Final. Evan turned to his lawyer, speaking fast and low, but the man only shook his head. Two bailiffs stepped in and guided Evan through a side door, his shoulders sagging, his face emptied of color. I stood slowly, Ruth's hand resting on my shoulder. 18 months, she said. That's a strong sentence. It fits, I replied. Lena stood beside me, eyes wet but steady. Is it wrong that I feel relieved? No, I said. It's not. We walked out into the cold afternoon. Snow had started again, light and steady, softening the city. What happens now? She asked. We move forward. That's it? That's it. She hugged me, quick, tight, then headed for her car. Martin caught me on the steps. Hell of a thing. Yeah. You handled it well. I handled it the only way I could. He nodded, shook my hand, and left. I stood there a moment longer, watching the snow fall, the cold seeping through my coat. The trial was over, the sentence delivered, the record complete. That was enough.